turn now to CBS News senior national security contributor and former acting director of the CIA, Michael Morell, and Washington Post columnist David Ignatius. Mike, I want to start with you. What questions would you be asking if you were still inside, or are you asking now about the situation?
I think that the intelligence community is going to be absolutely critical to how this plays out because there's so much that we don't know. And the fundamental job of the intelligence community is to fully inform a presidential decision. So if I were in my old job, I would take out a yellow pad and I would start writing questions that the president needs answers to. And the two questions at the top of the list are, number one, what are Kim Jong-un's intentions? The conventional wisdom is that he's trying to deter us from ever moving against him and ending his regime. I believe that's the case. But there's also a question whether he would, once he has a nuclear weapon and the ability to deliver it to the continental United States, would he use that to try to extort us, the Japanese, or the South Koreans? That's very different than him just trying to deter us. So that's a fundamental question that needs to be answered. Another question that needs to be answered is, does he have the capability today to put a U.S. city in Alaska, Hawaii, the continental United States at risk? Is it a year from now, or can he do it today? Jim Clapper, the former DNI, has said repeatedly over the last several months, we have to assume that he can do it today. So we need to take that into account when we start making our military plans. So those are the two key questions for me.
David, this week we had what seemed like very different signals, and help us straighten this out. You had the president saying fire and fury if the North Koreans make any more threats. They did. Then you had the Secretary of State saying everybody should sleep soundly at night. Help us understand those two statements.
Well, that was quite a passage from fire and fury to sleep well, and then there were the efforts to make people think that it was all really the same policy. That was one of the things that Director Pompeo stressed in his interview with you. Donald Trump clearly believes that in this confrontation, he's the secret sauce. He's the guy whose rhetoric is going to communicate the message strongly, not just to North Korea, but to China. To the extent there is a clear strategy here, it is make China be the intermediary, the big power in the region that brings North Korea to the table, that makes it impossible for Kim to continue with his threats. That's the strategy. Some of this rhetoric, I think, is intended to frighten the Chinese into taking action. I will note one point. Everybody talks about the rhetoric being a terrible mistake. In a nuclear crisis, the idea of throwing words around scares all of us. But the U.S., it's usually been thought, doesn't really have military options for dealing with North Korea. The strange thing about the president's fire and fury and all these statements is that it's got the whole world thinking that we do have a military option and we may be about to use it. From what I know, except for covert actions and preemptive B-52 raids, we do not have an option. We have a 45 to 60-day run-up period before we even have forces in place. So the president's hot rhetoric has made people think that we've got more really on the line now than we may have.
John, there's two myths here. One is that there is a military option. David's absolutely right. There's not. We don't know where these weapons are. We don't know where all the missiles are. We don't have enough firepower to take out all the artillery along the DMZ. So there is not a military option here which solves this problem. That's myth number one. Myth number two is that China can solve this problem. I believe, and I think there's good evidence to back this up, that even if China wanted to use the leverage it has, it would be unlikely to sway Kim Jong-un. For Kim Jong-un, having these weapons is all about his own survival. He is not going to give them up under any pressure, even from China.
So if that's the case, where do we go, David? Because Kim Jong-un's not going to give them up, and Director Pompeo said he must give them up. That is the red line for the president.
So that's the trick of this diplomacy, and that's what the Chinese will be thinking about. So it's interesting that the U.S. and China have the identical definition of the end state. There will be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. They are not divided on that at all. So the question is, how do you have a formula that achieves that over time? I keep being told, as I ask questions over the weekend, as early as this morning, don't expect a rapid denouement of this. This is going to be gradual. China, so far, is doing what we want. The administration is going to turn up the heat on China with some additional trade sanctions this week, and that will seem discordant, but it's part of what they. But they talk about a horizon that stretches into next year. What they want is for Kim to stop testing missiles now. If he shoots the missile on Tuesday at Guam, or the 4 missiles at Guam, I think it's then a very different ballgame. It's a deliberate escalation in the face of this rhetoric, and then, watch out.
I just say we need to try diplomacy. We need to try the China angle. But I think at the end of the day, we're going to face a choice. We're going to face a choice of taking military action to try to degrade, as difficult and horrific as that would be, on one end, and on the other end, acceptance, containment, and deterrence. That's the choice the president's going to have to face. And his rhetoric ties him in, right, to the harder line. And if he doesn't do that, he loses credibility.
And you know, the director said the president had been clear. We went back and looked. He has tweeted this here and said that there, but it did seem today that the line is red if they have this capability. The final question to you, David, is containment. Containment has been a part of U.S. policy with other countries, and in this case, so why doesn't it work here? Is it really just all about the unpredictability of the leader? Is there a way that somebody could get to containment as a U.S. policy if, in the end, that's where negotiation leads us?
If Kim Jong-un did things that conveyed the sense that he is a more rational leader, that he is more trustworthy, I suppose you could change the calculus. It was interesting to hear Pompeo on the one hand say, I judge him to be rational. I think he hears the messages, and on the other hand say, we can't allow this man to have weapons. Just one point to note, finally. It is estimated by the Defense Intelligence Agency that he already has up to 60 weapons. We're talking about this as if it's a future change. It's already happened, and we are living with it. And the question is, are there limits that would make it easier to live with it and sell to our allies, Japan and South Korea, so they wouldn't want weapons too?